Hi everyone, welcome to the first Candid video of Wake of Poseidon. This isn't anything that's going to be scripted or, has a particular point I want to make. I'm basically just going to be talking about the level design process as I'm doing it and as I'm discovering it while working on this game. So I'm just going to hop right into it. I'm not going to preface this too much. So as you can see here, I'm just working on the beginnings of level 2, and I've already decided that I'm going to use the Mario design philosophy as indicated in one of Mark Brown's wonderful videos about how to go about the level design process, which is to say I'm coming up with a theme, and then I'm going to explore that theme throughout the level and try to find variations of it and new ways that I can challenge the player, as well as educate the player on how to approach those challenges as they progress through the level. So for the second level, obviously I don't want to make the challenge too difficult. I'm focusing on basic platforming skills because I would assume by the end of the first level they've learned the concept of running and jumping and shooting, and now it's time to up that a little bit and add this new element here, which are moving platforms. So as you can see, I have not gotten very far into this, and right now I'm just doing the white boxing. So there's no artsy fartsy stuff going on. It is just white boxes. So where I left off, here I'll just do a quick demonstration of the level itself. Where I've left off as the first enemy encounter, which takes place over here on the far right. You start out in this area here, move to your first platform. It's just a simple education mechanic, and then you move on to your first fight, and I intend to progress from there. So as you can see, you start out. I should probably mention those guys aren't actually supposed to spawn there. That's just to get around a bug with the spawning system that I don't have time to fix. Basically, the first couple of times enemies spawn, they don't show up in the correct place. So the part I'm working on right now is this encounter. And I apologize for the sound. There's a lot of background noise, and my microphone is probably sitting directly next to the speakers, so that's probably way too loud. So as you can see, there's definitely a lot that needs to be worked on here. This scenario is what I like to call a gauntlet. It's basically where the screen locks in place, and you have to kill a certain number of enemies before you can progress. Except as you can see here, there is no way to progress because I haven't finished it yet. So already I see a problem with this because something was supposed to happen that did not. And that is, there's supposed to be enemies flying into this area and charging at the player. So I'm going to find out what's going on with that right now. And here's a wonderful bug. Yeah. Hopefully we can fix that relatively easily. You'll notice as I work, I tend to move the camera along because it's such a two-dimensional heavy game. Really, I have to know what's visible in the frame at all times while working on it. So I tend to track the camera along and stop it at certain points to make sure that what I expect to be in the frame during play will actually be there. Or at least in theory while designing it. Sometimes I have to go back and tweak things after I play it. So you can see these arcing paths here. I'm going to have a couple of enemies basically charge down from them. But to do that, I need to activate all of this. So I have this mechanic here. I have this device I created called a wave spawner, and it's basically just the system that sends all the enemies in and waits for you to kill them, tracks who dies and who lives, and when they all die it moves on to the next wave and so on and so forth until it gets to the end. And because I have these as two separate waves that occur in parallel, for technical reasons I'm doing that. What I need to do is sort of sidechain this one so that it tells the other wave spawner to begin, because this other wave spawner won't necessarily know when it's supposed to start. So at the first wave, going to add an event, and I'm going to, you know what, I'm not quite going to do that. Instead, I'm going to create a child object, and you'll see here why in a minute. I'm going to call this charge wave, because it is a wave of chargers, as they're called in the game. This is disabled, and this is also going to be disabled. So what I'm going to do is enable this parent object. And the reason why will become clear in a second. So that gets enabled immediately upon the first wave starting. Then I'm going to add a set active. This is a little handy utility I've come up with that basically just enables, well, actually it performs an operation depending on the trigger that caused it to happen. So in this case, I'm going to have this occur when this game object becomes enabled, and it is going to activate this game object after a delay of, we'll say, 2 seconds. So effectively what happens is the first wave starts, it activates this parent object. This parent app object then activates this child object 2 seconds later. So effectively, once the wave starts spawning, 2 seconds later, these guys start charging in. And we're going to see how that works out. Right now, and I'm going to give myself a little music just because I like to work with music. Hopefully this won't sit on top of the audio I'm recording too much. One of the things I like about programming this way, not using code, is that you know, you don't have to wait for compile times, and you can change things around at runtime often, and I just find it to be an easier way to work overall. You know, I am a programmer. I do write a lot of code. I don't cover it much in the making of videos because, honestly, I think it's a boring thing to talk about for anyone who's not a programmer. But, you know, overall, I still find this to be an effective way of doing high-level gameplay elements. I don't like writing code because it's just more code you have to keep hanging around in libraries and libraries, and eventually you forget what it all does. If you have stuff like this, it's very generic, and it can be reused for a lot of different things without having to change 1 or 2 lines here and then keep another file around. So here we go. We're going to go test this now. So those guys have jumped in. That is enabled. Yep, and 2 seconds later, they fly in. So it looks like it's working. And 10 seconds later, the second wave of those flyers shoot. Yep, there we go. That was weird. I don't know what happened to those bullets. It's a little concerning. Also, these guys are being kind of dumb, you know? Like, they're staying way back from the edge. I really want them to get closer. I wonder what's going on here. I feel like something is going on here. So, nope, he's moving around. Let's take a look at his brain and see what he's thinking. So, as you can see, I use Node Canvas. At this point, I don't think I'll ever work on another project again without it. It's just too handy. So, he seems to be perpetually stuck in this attack state. Yeah, max range is not too far. This is odd. What happens if we make that dynamic? That's really weird. I've never seen that happen before, but I guess it's not terrible. It still challenges the player. It looks a little dumb. Not the biggest problem in the world, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. So, moving on. Next thing I need to give the player a way to get out of this little gauntlet trap here, because as it stands right now, they cannot jump 4 units high, which you can see this is quite deliberately made to be that high so that they can't do it. So we're going to go ahead and use Pro Builder, which is another one of those tools I'll never work again without. It has a lot of problems. I won't lie, it's far from perfect, but it serves its purpose in many ways well enough that I can't live without it at this point. I just wish maybe they'd give it a little more love and attention than it's really getting right now. So we're going to make some stairs here. And I'm going to show you a trick. If you've never used Pro Builder before, if you're kind of new to it, you want to make your stairs a little taller than you think you need. So if I think I need it to be 4 units tall, I probably want to make it like 4.5. Gonna give it 14 stairs to give it a nice. Yeah, that looks good. It doesn't actually matter that much how many stairs there are. It's more just for looks than anything. Make it 6 long. I think that's pretty standard for stairs. So you'll notice the stairs are a little taller than they need to be, and there's a reason for this. So when I go to build this stair, I want it to be a mesh collider because I want a ramp. I want to make it convex. So if I were to make it the exact height needed, and I've made this mistake many times, you'll see this first stair. That little bump there, a lot of times player controllers get caught on that, especially if it's too tall, which it usually is. So to avoid that, I just make the stairs a little taller than needed, sink it down into the ground a little bit, countersink it, and then the ramp smoothly transitions up to the top without any hold-ups. Another thing I'm going to do here is get rid of these faces because, yeah, another one of those little problems with this Pro Builder. Sometimes the selection tools don't work very well. There you go. And you can see stairs work. They're there. Now, we need to make them move. And I might have a simple script for this, I'm not sure. No, I don't. That's okay. Behavior tree. I'm not going to write a script. Instead, I'm going to... No, you know what? I'm probably going to use this a lot more. So... Asset. Platform. Mover. Let's see. It's a one-shot mover because I have the code attached to this other one that moves it back and forth, as you can see. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and steal all of that and throw it into this guy and just edit a little bit. So as you can see, I start with a sequencer. First thing it does, here's a little trick I'll show you. Add variables. So we're going to add 2 transforms. T1 and T2. And then we're going to add a couple of vector 3s. P1 and P2. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to be able to configure where the platform will move using objects that are childed to this stair so that I can just save it all as one prefab. But I want to be able to guarantee that those positions will be fixed in world space even though these stairs have moved and thus the transforms relative to them have also moved. So, let's see. Why does it say P1 does not exist? Ah, there we go. It just hasn't updated yet. Okay, perfect. So, first thing it does is it sets P1 to T1's position, P2 to T2's position. Simple enough. And then it repeats forever the following. Oh, no, I don't want that. that is for the moving platform that moves back and forth. I don't want it to repeat forever. I want it to do this precisely once. So delete that. And we're simply going to move... You know what? I don't even need the P1. Or I should say I don't need the... Yeah. Delete variable. Yes. Delete... No. I'm doing this all wrong. P1, T1, delete this guy. Yes. Delete that. And now P1 becomes T1. T2 gets deleted. Yeah, that was unnecessarily confusing, but we're good now. Also don't need this sequencer, so this just got a lot simpler. So basically all it's doing is saving the position of this transform in world space, and then moving this object to that position from where it was currently over time. Time in seconds, we'll give it a starter value of 2. Simple enough. Platform move one shot. There we go. So, let's go ahead and add an empty object. Center it. I have difficulty believing that that's centered. You know what? Maybe it is. That's why. Pivot point was wrong. Okay. So, we add a handy thing I have called a bound visualizer. It's just a way of for me to determine where a point in space is without having to think too hard. So you can see I use them over here as well. And it's just attached to an empty transform. It literally does nothing when you look at the code. It's just draws gizmos. I don't even think the information is stored. Nope, yeah, it's all compiled out once the game is compiled. Okay, here we go. Going to add this to our blackboard, which is another great way of saying general purpose variable storage. So that's our P1. That's where we want the stairs to end up. So we're going to take the stairs out of there, or the point out of the stairs, move the stairs to where we want to hide them. Return P1. It should save its relative position, which it did. And now we are going to disable this behavior tree. Yep, and I'm going to put it in room 2 because that is where this is occurring. Okay, so wave spawner. Once we complete our wave completely, all waves complete, add this in. In our stairs, we're going to call the mono behavior tree, enable, turn it on. That should enable this behavior, which should raise the stairs up once all the fighting is done. So let's go test that right now. I really hope that my voice isn't coming out as a mumbling. I'm standing a little bit away from the microphone as I work here. I really should have equipped a gun that can kill things faster, but whatever. I feel like something went horribly wrong with those two flyers. I feel like they crashed into each other and killed each other. I'm not quite sure. I want to see what happens here. Yeah, they just shot each other. I know what's wrong there. They're using a damage box for their projectile that they themselves are vulnerable to. Okay, so the stairs did not move. Oh, what a waste of time that was. Okay, so stairs, it did enable it. As you can see, it's done and over with. It does repeat itself, though. The problem was the stairs are static. Also, I never set this as the start, so there's that. Okay, well, let's try that again. Yeah. Silly me. Never forget to make your moving objects not static. And don't forget to set your start points. That also matters. While we're at it, here's another valuable lesson for those of you who are new to this. Give yourself a way to easily set up scenarios without having to fiddle around too much. You know, and dragging objects in, dragging objects out. I have this player test spawner, and this entire mechanism is used to indicate the starting point in the final build, but in test builds, this all gets compiled out in the final build, and it's just a marker for where the start of the level is. But in testing, it actually goes through and feeds back into the system that spawns players, and allows me to configure all kinds of settings, like which character I want to play, what weapon I want to start with, how many lives I have, how many players there are, which is just a nice, easy way of testing out scenarios. And I can put a bunch of these in the level and just disable this one, put this one over here, you know, to kind of move things along and get started the way I want to get started, rather than, you know, having to drag the player object in and configure everything. Automating all of that just really speeds the whole process up and allows me to test ideas faster. This is probably the part that kills me the most, when I hit the play button and then I wait and wait some more. There we go. So I have the insta-kill pistol. Oh, here's another trick. If you're new to Unity, this window here, the inspector window, uses the serialization system to feed information into the window and then back out to the objects, and that's a rather slow process. So if you notice your game is chugging a lot in the editor, just go ahead and deselect anything, or, you know, go to another window that doesn't have anything being filled out in real time. And that will definitely speed up your frame rate if you're having performance issues in the editor. So you can see the bug I was talking about there earlier. Watching those guys shoot themselves is kind of funny. As you can see, I have the super cheating insta pistol. Stairs came up. Oh no. I left the repeat on. I left the repeat on. Okay. Well, I know it's working at least. So, wave spawner prototype. Where did I put that? Room 2. That's where. Stairs. Yeah, we don't want it to repeat. We just want it to happen once, and then one and done, right? So as you can see, I'm going to have to give myself shortcuts throughout the level to get past the boring parts and move to the more interesting parts. And that's pretty much the process of coming up with an encounter. I'm reasonably happy with that for, you know, an early encounter in the level. It's not too challenging. It kind of gives you an idea of the sort of scenarios you can expect to see. A little boring to look at, but that's to be expected when you're whiteboxing. I don't worry about adding in graphical details like that at all until the game is fun to play, basically. I never added a starting position. It's probably pretty important, huh? Yep, okay, well that's a mistake on my part. Give this one more go, and then I'll probably move on to the next idea I want to work on, which is a variation of that moving platform you saw before, but with a little more risk involved. And there you can see that bug I was talking about again, where they spawned over here momentarily and then teleported over there. Okay, there we go. Works as intended. Ooh. Oh my. That was not intended. Oh, that's the first spawner, the test spawner. Okay. So, room 2, finished. Well, maybe not finished, but good enough for now. On to room 3. And I like to break them up into chunks like this. It makes it much more manageable. It makes it, you know, easier to come up with isolated ideas, I guess you could say. Again, to give an analogy of another creative process, you could kind of think of it as being like the way the writers of The Simpsons write Simpsons jokes, which is they come up with a joke first, and then they sort of string them together and fill out a story along the way. And yeah, I guess going with that analogy, you could make the argument that's probably why The Simpsons hasn't been funny for the last 25 years. But, you know, this is a video game that's not. What I am doing is I'm taking a similar approach, that I'm coming up with thematically related, similar design concepts, building them out in their own sort of isolated little world, and then stringing them together to make a complete whole level. And that's mostly just for organization and for my own sanity. It's just easier to build and test each section individually rather than try to build the whole level in one big go. That's not going to happen. And as I said when I mentioned that the Mario design philosophy, that is, I think that lends itself to this way of doing things. So, first thing I'm going to do is add a floor. And I'm just going to steal this one because why not? It's good. And I want to make this a little different. I don't want it to be just a flat floor. Let's move our camera over a little bit. I want to start getting some verticality in here. I don't want to get too challenging yet, but I want to get some verticality in here. So, first let's add our platform. And as you can see, it's similar to the stairs. It has points that I can move around, and then those points will be saved in world space. And the platform itself will then basically repeat this loop forever, where it goes from one place, waits a while, goes back to the other place. And I just realized I didn't quite do this right. There we go, much better. So I don't know if I want this. I think I want to keep this platform moving horizontally. I don't want to move vertically just yet, because I don't want to start adding too many different elements. And this is kind of a pain in the butt to set this up. So we have to move these out. Yes. This is just for my own visual edification. So I'm going to add this here, and there's going to be a pit, and I want to add some sort of risk or some sort of dangerous obstacle. I don't know, like, I don't know if I want it to be a wall or if I want it to be an enemy that's shooting at them from, like, off in the distance and they can't get to it, so they just have to avoid the bullets. But I want it to be, you know, dangerous. You know what? I'm getting too complicated too early. Instead, I'm just going to make it a bottomless pit and leave it at that for now. And if you're wondering how this moving platform works, it's actually pretty simple. Essentially, I have a trigger attached with a moving platform script that only collides with the player. This will not work for NPCs because of the way nav meshes work. And essentially all it does is look for the object that touched the trigger and then set that object as being parented to this platform. And essentially that moving the platform will then move the player along with it. And I guess ideally I should have a rigid body attached. I don't know how big a difference it makes since Unity 5. Since moving static colliders isn't quite as expensive as it used to be, but I'm going to err on the side of caution and make it a kinematic, non-gravity affected body. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So, with that being set up, I'm just going to have a bottomless pit here to start with, and then a very short interlude, just this brief breathing space here. Just enough for them to land on and feel slightly safe. And I tend to go by units of 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yep, and you'll see it's a 12 by 6. The reason I do that is because 12 is a highly composite number, which means that it has more divisible, evenly divisible factors than any number smaller than it. So if you like to use numbers like 10 or 5, I would recommend you bump yourself up to 6 and 12. Gives you a little more wiggle room, and you'll find you get a lot more utility out of it. And that's not just for like metrics, that works for game systems as well. There's a reason a lot of RPGs tend to cap their levels at 60, and that's again because 60 is a highly composite number. So if you start looking at systems and games a lot, you'll see numbers like 20, 30, 60, 120, 360. And the reason for that is because they're easier numbers to work with in a lot of cases. So we have that. We have our safe spot here. We're going to add another platform immediately after. And just to make sure I set this up correctly. Nope, I did not. So, move that guy. Move that guy. That was dumb. I don't know why I did that. Okay. No. What am I doing here? I'm being stupid. Oh my, I've completely screwed this up. Let's just start over. Actually, let's keep him here. Because I want these to move the same distance, right? I don't want to get too funky with the players just yet. So, we have that. We have this brief interlude, and then we're going to have another safe space after this. But on the second one, in the background, I want to have another platform where an enemy will be waiting to shoot at them. And here you'll notice one of the first big issues I have with perspective in this game. And this comes from the fact that I chose such a flat perspective to work with. So it is very difficult to tell where this platform is in relation to this platform and this platform. And there's a lot of rules that I've had to come up with as guidelines to myself for how to visually clarify this to the player. And there's many ways I can do it. One is alignment, making sure objects are aligned on a grid in a sensible fashion. I can use color, I can use light, I can use a lot of different effects, but the general rule is just don't make ambiguous situations like this to begin with instead of having to come up with solutions around it. So, for example, you'll notice in all the jumping sections, I don't do anything weird like that, right? Like, I'm never going to put that platform there in relation to that, because it's actually quite difficult to tell where this platform is in relation to, like, it looks like they overlap there, but they actually don't. As you can see, there's a gap. But right here, it looks like there's a little bit of a, you just jump up and you'll be fine. You think it's a jump up, but actually they're on the same level. There is no jump up, it's just further in the background. So I have one general rule, which is never require the player to make a jump that is not aligned on this x-axis. So, for example, oh, I did that backwards. So, for example, I'm not going to do something like this, right? I don't want to have. Well, okay, I could get away with that, but I would not necessarily want to do what I showed you before, and I also would not want to do something like this, because that's a little ambiguous as to where this lines up with that. So instead, I want to give a visual cue, right, of where this platform is in relation to this one. So instead, I might have just a little bit of a extra lip here to visually indicate, okay, yeah, here, and even that's not perfect because this is sort of hidden behind that, but it's a lot better. Probably a better alternative to that would be to do something like this, where it is clearly, you can see the gap here, and you can see that this lines up with that, and that lines up with that, and that's just a safe horizontal jump. And I also would not want to do something like this, because then again, it looks like, oh, maybe I'm jumping back in depth. I don't know. You can't really tell that you have to jump higher. So the only time I would do that is if it's obvious that it is definitely a step up. Other problems would be, you know, letting the player know when they can and can't fall off the back and front of the level. The front is fairly simple in most cases. It's just a matter of using one visual cue that I consistently use everywhere, and that is making this front area pitch black, like that. And you know, once the player gets used to seeing that, I have confidence that they will come to associate that with being a safe wall that they cannot pass through. I've also reinforced it in a few cases by adding extra props and then giving them, let's see, giving them a solid black value. Using a bit of a forced perspective effect here, I can sort of indicate to the player, hey, yeah, this is definitely a place you can stand. Ooh. You can stand here, it's safe to walk here, you're not gonna fall off the cliff or anything like that. You know, it doesn't really come through there too well, I guess, but when you're in the context of a level with a lot of different props around, it becomes a little more apparent. This is a really bad example, but you know, you get the idea that you can use elements in the foreground to represent that as well. Oh, another thing is another way I can indicate where objects are in space is using water in this case. As you can see, the water has a bit of an effect. Now, it doesn't work so well on the sides, like along the side here, it's not very visually apparent, but on the front, it's very apparent. So that issue before where I said, oh, we have this platform back in space and we can't tell where that is. Hold on, let me go ahead and switch this back to the default. Apply, apply. Get rid of this guy for a moment. So, as you know, my original assessment was, oh, hey, look at that. That's no good. And first and foremost, this shouldn't be floating in space like that. But yeah, you can't tell where that is in relation to this. But once we drop this water in, it becomes immediately obvious where it is. It's in the background. So that is another way that I can visually represent a space without having to worry too much about it. Big difference, right? Water, nothing. Water, nothing. So yeah, I think I'm going to end up leaving this in here. Yeah. Although I want a smaller one if I can get it. Wow, that is the smaller one. Okay. Yikes. Oh, no it isn't. No it isn't. It's... well, it's exactly the same. Okay, yeah, I'll just work with this for now. That's okay. I can live. I can make it work. And here's another problem. I'm constantly... you know, and this water causes a lot of problems, so it's not the be-all, end-all solution to everything. First and foremost, it really messes things up in deferred shading, which... at this point, I've had to give up on deferred shading anyway, because writing a toon shader for it is way beyond my ability right now. So most of the shading works in forward anyway. And at that point, what's the point of even having it in deferred shading mode? But especially this water does not play well with sprites at all in deferred shading. There is a problem here, which I will show you though, that isn't just shading related. And that is this unsightly seam right here. And I can hide that effect a little bit by, say, adding walls to sort of, you know, give a transition between this interior scene, what might be an interior scene, and what might be an exterior scene. And obviously this isn't actual object placement, I'm just giving you an example. But, you know, oops, camera. Yeah, so, you know, obvious interior scene, obvious exterior scene, not too bad of a transition in the background. The foreground is a pain in the butt, though. And the best solution I've come up with so far is, first we have to paint our objects the correct color, solid black. Oh no, I did that all kinds of wrong. Default, and then make that solid black. And what we can do is add a cube. And I have no idea where this cube is in world space. There it is. This is some of the problems with working in an isometric view. You never know where anything actually is. So, put this guy here. Now, this isn't a place where the player can actually walk. This is just to visually block off that water. And I'll show you another problem it creates in just a minute here. But, paint this black. Okay, looks like the problem solved, right? No water. Now when we shift over this way, yeah, you have that really odd angle there that just doesn't look right. And I'll be honest, I don't necessarily know a great way to fix that. Like that's kind of the best I've come up with up to this point, is just, you know, angle this a little bit to make it look like a straight line. And it works well enough. It's not perfect. And because there is a slight perspective, that will warp a little bit as you walk through it. So let's actually test this transition out now. I'm a little curious to see how it works. And once again, like I said, it's a good idea to not have these things selected. A lot of the built-in Unity components won't have too much problem, but your custom components, and especially if you're using add-ons to provide custom editors of any kind, will definitely have an effect. Yeah, this is not a walkable area, or it's not intended to be one. But that effect actually doesn't work too badly, except you can't tell where it ends. There is a way around it, though. Ooh. You can see just ever so slight of a bug here. Yeah, look at that. Ah, whoops. Okay. So, yeah, it picks me up. I probably ought to make those triggers a little bit smaller. than the outer. Yeah, I definitely should. So here's the trick I'm going to use. Move this back. Oh, let's put it back on that for a moment. We're going to move this back, and then we're going to extend it forward. We're going to shrink it. And I use this extensively in the first level because it worked. And if it works, I will keep using it until it doesn't. And that still doesn't look great. But the art of bullshit, I feel, will rescue me here. And I'm getting way too much into the graphical side of this right now. I really shouldn't be worrying about this, but I just want to give an example of how these kind of problems pop up and the kind of shenanigans you have to go through to fix them. So, solid black. And this is where that, what is, oh, right, this isn't a Pro Builder object. So this is where that forced perspective silhouette effect I mentioned earlier really comes into play. So we want to make this a little taller, and I know it probably is not the best idea to be scaling it like that, but whatever. It's not like, you know, I'm doing tons of amazing high fidelity graphics here, right? You know, I think the player's machine will survive handling a few dozen to a few hundred polygons. Although I do have to say, Pro Builder is pretty bad about adding a lot of extra geometry. I've seen places where, you know, a sphere that has like a few hundred vertices on it can end up with like a few thousand. I'm still not too happy with this. Yeah, well, that's just an example to show you the kinds of shenanigans that pop up. I'm not going to worry too much about it just yet. Like I said, this is white boxing. I think it's good enough just to have the water here so that I know where that is. So, entities. I have a special entity specifically meant to be used in these sorts of situations. I think I can... Most of my enemies I can't actually just drop in the scene because they won't work. They're designed to be spawned by another object. But in this case, I think I can just drop this in the scene and it will work. Pretty sure. Not entirely sure. So we're about to find out here. And I'm kind of hoping if the player can target him, I'm going to remove the ability to target him because I don't want the player to target them. I want the player to have to just deal with the danger. Perfect. Well, you'd have to sacrifice your life to do it, so I'm perfectly okay with that, I think. Actually, no, I'm not. You know what? I'm going to make him invincible. His collision is turned off, which should include his hitbox. Yep, his hitbox. And the aim assist, yeah. So if I turn this off, the entire mob will have his collision turned off. So here we go. We're going to run this again. And once again, this is going to kill performance if I leave this on. So deselect it. Here we go. Running along, running along. Oh my, what a danger. And I'll have to put more visual indicators in there to let them know, hey, this is a place you'll die. The turrets are kind of dumb. They aim at where you were, not where you're going. And, you know, they don't adjust in between shots. So that's probably not that bad a deal. In fact, that's almost entirely underwhelming in terms of danger. Like, just sitting on the platform is enough to avoid it. Yeah, I like the biggest danger is the platform actually putting you in the way of harm, and I don't even see that happening. So, first of all, let's break this prefab completely, which is different from the default break. This one really does actually break it so that you can't even hit apply, which I think was a very good idea, and I'm glad I did it. Okay, so wow, that looks a lot more complicated than I thought it would be. In fact, this entire object is way more complicated than I thought it would be. If rotate weapon is true. Is it true? Let's find out. God, I can't even... There's not even a variable for it. Okay, that's probably why. System... Yep, I'm going to add it right now. And this is not part of the prefab. This is actually its own separate asset, so this will update regardless of what I do. Okay. So that should rotate the weapon between shots, which I think will make it much more threatening. And I'm probably going to up the max attacks as well. Yeah, let's do that. Let's make it 5 and 5. Yeah, there we go. Now it's tracking the player. A little more dangerous. Still kind of dumb. Still aiming where the player is, not where they were. But as you can see, because there's not a huge delay between the full burst, it is a little more dangerous. Although I'm still pretty successfully evading it here without having to actually do anything. Oh, one of the niceties of the platform is you can't actually be knocked back. Okay. So, that actually is working more or less the way I want it to. One other thing I'm going to add to this. This might be a little overkill, but processing throttle, which sounds absurd, but you'll probably understand it a little better here in a minute. Okay, so basically what a processing throttle is it's a way of me setting a range of distances where components and game objects can be activated and deactivated. So in this case, I am going to disable the AI once the player gets beyond a certain range. So it's activated at a range of 0 and at a distance of, we'll say 15? No, 25. And I'll check every second. It will deactivate this blackboard. No, I don't want to deactivate the blackboard. That's awfully silly. I want to deactivate. And this is why having 2 inspectors is nice, even if it is a little intensive. I want to deactivate the FSM owner. So it's active there. At 25 units, it will become deactive. And the scan rate is just how often does it check to see the distance. And you might be wondering, what is the distance relative to? And I have markers on important objects like players, the camera, stuff like that, that are known as centers of universe. And it's just anything that's important and should be considered a center of the universe. These will compare their distance to all objects with those markers and determine what should be enabled or disabled based on the distance. And I can also give IDs to the center of universes. In this case, I am going to allow all center of universes to be relevant. And again, this is just for this particular instance of the turret, because players can't kill it. I want it to be able to deactivate itself after it gets beyond a certain range where it's relevant. So we'll give this a test, make sure it's working. The AI is active, which is incorrect. That should not be. Oh. Okay, well, it's still active, which is incorrect. That should not be. That is interesting. Center of universe. I wonder if this is broken since the last time I used it. I haven't used it in a while, actually. And you'll see it actually uses a hash value, so it's not comparing strings all the time, just for performance reasons. That should already be disabled. I don't know why that isn't working at all, but it's not. Yeah. So let's go into our script and run our debugger. Attach and run. Okay, so at the highest rate, oh, because it's the scan rate at this setting is ridiculously set to 0. Okay, so 25. There we go, and it activated. Okay, that was the problem. I forgot to set the scan rate for when it's turned on. And at that point, you can see it was disabled. There's a little icon here, handily enough. And then when we get back within 25 meters, should turn back on. Yep, there it's on. And it's off. And it's on. Hence the reason it's called a processing throttle. It throttles processing based on the distance to centers of universe. 25 meters might be a little big. Let's make it 20. I'm terrible at judging distance, especially with this weird perspective. So that's on. That's off. Yeah, I kind of need it to be 25, don't I? Off. On. Because I need it to be on anywhere along here. Wow, I do have to get a good distance away. Well, there you go. It's working. And I probably should have saved that beforehand. And I only need to check like every second. You know, it doesn't need to be a crazy amount of updates. So that saves a little bit on comparisons of distances. So there we have it. That's how I come up with an encounter. Basically, take a concept from the theme I'm working on, add an element to it, mutate, extend, expand. And that was just pretty much not really a recap, I guess just an example of how I'm going about creating levels in this game. Hopefully you learned something from that. I know that I have definitely been learning a lot going through this process, and I've found that, you know, just watching videos, just looking at advice, just reading books isn't really enough. You really do just have to get in there and not just make mistakes, but also, you know, try things out. And perhaps for me, the biggest tool I've had is to just make guidelines. Say, okay, given the limitations of technology, given the limitations of the gameplay mechanics, what can and can't I get away with? And, you know, as that example I gave earlier with, you know, the platform distances and perspective issues, that's a perfect example of, you know, just coming up with rules, saying don't do this, always do this, and here's your play area where you can sort of experiment and play around with. And you find that once you find that sweet spot, that really is where all of your experimentation comes from. And I feel at that point, you know, making levels becomes an expression of the mechanics, and how can you make variations and interesting new ideas and challenges. So, like I said, hopefully you learned something from that. I'll probably do some more of these if people are interested. So that'll probably tide you over until I get the next making of episode out. It came out a little bit late this week due to a lot of different things happening at the same time. And I'm just going to leave it at that. See you next time.